G'day everybody, and thank you Kevin for those opening comments. My name's Mark Sparvel from Microsoft Education, usually based in Seattle in Washington State, but coming to you live and well from my hometown in Adelaide, South Australia. I'll be talking to you for about 20 minutes. Have you ever gone to record a session for your students and it's taken about 6 times longer than the lesson itself? I had that experience putting together this session. So if it seems that it is a little bit inconclusive or it's a little bit wandery, it's because I struggled to try to pick out the right pieces and put them in the right order. And in the end, I thought, look, I'm just going to record it and people can follow up with me. So consider this to be both an introduction, but also an introduction to the work that Microsoft has been doing, thinking about learning forwards, not return to normal, but learning forwards and thinking around how education needs to be reimagined along the process. What have been the challenges from 2020, but also what have been the insights and the lessons learned? What will be the durable changes which will remain long after the public health crisis is concluded? So bear with me. If we're not following one another on Twitter, why not? At Sparvel, you can track me down. I'm always sharing information and insights about education. As I referred to before, Microsoft partnered with New Pedagogies for Deep Learning last year, and we published this document, Education Reimagined, a very practical guide, an evidence-based guide, which looked at system and school responses to the public health crisis in 2020 and organised responses into three-phased model, providing strategies with each phase to help guide schools and systems and practitioners as they start to deal with the return to quality teaching and learning processes. A little bit about me, first of all. I've been a teacher and a school leader at school level and also at a district level for 25 years or more, working mostly across Australia and then further afield across Southeast Asia with the Principals Institute of Australia, and then working globally extensively for the last 10 years, supporting schools, districts and systems as they undertake improvement processes. And I was thinking about teaching when I was putting this together, and I grabbed some of my favorite teaching pictures, some of my favorite memories, and they're on the screen at the moment. You can see in the top left corner, I'm busy hosting a webinar from a remote Aboriginal community in Northern Australia, and the students are teaching other students across Australia about the march of the noxious cane toad and its impact on the environment. And that was a really powerful lesson for me, that students needed to be teachers, and that this context that the students lived in and their experiences and their stories need to be heard by others. Students can and should be experts. Over next door to that, one of the schools I was principal of was a surfing school. It was a bit like Summer Bay, to tell you the truth. And people now say to me, why did you leave that? But the school taught surfing and I learned to surf, and I was terrified about that. In this photo, my knees were literally knocking together under the water. But what it taught me was about mindset, about adopting a beginner's mindset, being prepared to learn anew, being prepared to take risks and being prepared to fail and to make new mistakes. Because if you're making old mistakes, that's a problem. But if you're making new mistakes, well, there's opportunity to learn, to innovate and to extend ourselves. Underneath that, I'm talking on a phone on a boat. It's a stretch of water between Australia and Kangaroo Island, and you can't see it, but there's a hydrophone drifting beneath the water, listening to the chatter of bottlenose dolphins. And again, there's a webinar happening connecting experts to classrooms across Australia. And this taught me that learning should be and could be open-walled, and that we should invite in expertise, but similarly, we should also share our expertise with others. When you think about those three teaching experiences, you realize that they're all examples of remote learning. And these were stretching back many, many years ago, some of these pictures. They're also some of my most powerful learning, because the learning was, for the students, was contextual, it was relevant, it was authentic, it was highly engaging, and it was very personalized. Now, last year was, for everybody, incredibly challenging and continues to be as we deal with complexity, change, and ambiguity. And the technology is not perfect for anyone, everywhere, all of the time. But when I exited teaching, I put on the screen the technology that I had available to me. Some of you might recognize some of those things. What we're able to do now, even on a bad day, is far more superior than what we would have been able to achieve on a very good day if everything worked back when I started teaching. So, one thing that I'm constantly reminded about is when we think about what should learning look like, what could learning look like when we're between the glass, when we're in a fully remote environment, a fully face-to-face environment, or a hybrid learning environment, a intentional blend of the two, is that some things haven't changed at all. All people, all students, all adults, all humans want some pretty basic things. They want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to know that they belong, and they want to know that they have a sense of control. As humans, we want these things. Whether we're using breakout rooms in Teams, whether you're structuring one-to-one catch-ups and chats, whether you're using emotional check-ins, whether you're creating project-based learning, whatever it might be that's in your pedagogical bag, ensuring that students know that they're seen and they matter, that they have a voice, that they belong somewhere, and they have control or choice, voice, choice, agency is critical, because it's from there that drives motivation and engagement and resilience and grit, and allows students to feel connected, cared for, and therefore confident. So I'm going to start talking about the role that emotions play, therefore, because I think this is, I was asked today, what do I see as being one of the durable changes from 2020 onwards? And we all know that social and emotional learning is important. What 2020 has shown us is that social and emotional learning is fundamental, and it's not ornamental. It's a very powerful and intentional part of our teaching practice if we want every student to succeed. Emotions are quite literally the gatekeepers to attention, motivation, and cognition. And when teachers were asked in 2020 what was one of their greatest frustrations in teaching largely remotely, they overwhelmingly said the motivation of students. And when students were asked, what was one of their greatest challenges in 2020, they also replied maintaining attention, focus, being able to self-manage, essentially being able to motivate themselves to stay on task. So how are you feeling right now? Because emotions are the gatekeeper to everything we do. And we know that when students were asked in the survey by Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence as part of the Lady Gaga Born This Way Foundation a couple of years ago, how they felt, 75% described feeling about school in unpleasant emotional terms: tired, bored, and stressed. And if emotions are the gatekeeper to cognition, attention, and motivation, and you're tired, bored, and stressed, you're not going to be learning. And the same applies for adults. It's why having an organizer to help develop emotional vocabulary is so important. What you can see on the screen at the moment, which is probably familiar to some of you, is the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence mood meter. On the x-axis, each one of the quadrants run from unpleasant emotions in the red and blue through to pleasant emotions. Now, these aren't bad to good. We recognize that all emotions matter and serve a purpose. And each quadrant ranges from low energy to high energy. So, an example of a pleasant high energy emotion would be ecstatic, but blissful would be a low energy positive emotion. And similarly, over in the unpleasant emotions, a low energy unpleasant emotion would be to be troubled or repulsed, whereas a high energy might be enraged or disgusted. The key message for students is that all emotions matter. What's important is to be able to recognize, understand, label, express, and ultimately to be able to regulate their emotions, to be able to navigate from feeling angry to feeling maybe more optimistic. Let's not get too ambitious. Or maybe to shift from feeling lonely to feeling, at least feeling at ease. Do you have a strategy to get from there to there? Or even, do you recognize where you are in that place? One of the ways to develop that kind of emotional intelligence is obviously to develop an emotional vocabulary, which is one of the really important pieces of developing social and emotional skills. Just consider that most young people learn 5,000 words per year. Only 10% of those are learned through direct instruction. The rest of those words are learnt through their everyday use. So it's critical for us to be introducing the language of emotions because they allow students to name it, and if they can name it, they can tame it. So the same applies completely for educators. In a survey of 5,000 webinar participants last year, educators were feeling similarly anxious, uncertain, and stressed about their work because teachers want to do good. They want to do good for their students. And when asked what they were worried about achieving equity, being able to best support those students who were already at risk. They were feeling stressed and worried about their loss of professional connection with their peers. They really value working with other teachers, and they were feeling overwhelmed and burnt out by workload. Again, if emotions are the gatekeeper to motivation, cognition, and attention, and if you're feeling this way, then you're not going to be ready for learning. On an interesting side, we've just finished a new piece of research, a global survey across the US, UK, and India, and we asked a set of similar questions. And what was unanimous was that when compared to 2020, when asked about thinking forwards into 2021, teachers were less stressed, they were more optimistic, and they were about the same in terms of cautious. So what was interesting was that teachers remained cautious, but they were optimistic. They were more hopeful, and they were less stressed about thinking around how they were going to manage as they thought about 2021. And the students were exactly the same. They were still feeling apprehensive, but they were feeling more hopeful and more optimistic about what 2021 would bring. So, in summarizing the bit about emotions, they matter. They matter greatly. If we're interested in students achieving, and we know that a focus on social and emotional learning can produce a 13-point increase in academic grades up to 3.5 years later, and beyond that has positive impact across the entire lifespan of young people, resulting in more likely to have higher employment, higher income, less mental health issues, more active participation in community activities, volunteerism, more likely to report feeling happy, subjective well-being. This was a study done of kindergarteners, and it tracked them for 40 years, and there were thousands of them. Super interesting. You can grab that research from me afterwards. Emotions affect attention, memory, and learning. They directly impact decision-making, the quality of relationships, physical and mental health, and performance and creativity. And of course, school is an emotional roller coaster. It always has been, but certainly even more so in 2020. Many of you will be familiar with John Hattie's meta-analysis. Lots of things affect student learning, lots and lots of them. But some things affect student learning more than others. And that's where this meta-analysis is interesting, because the number one most significant impact on student learning is collective teacher efficacy. The belief that a group of teachers have that they have the skills, they have the ability, they have the support to make a difference. When they feel they can make a difference, they make a difference. So think about that slide earlier on around the emotional condition of teachers and the impact that that might have on their confidence in their ability to do good. When teachers believe they can do well, they do well. Interesting to note too that number 4 on that list, the same but for students. When students believe that they can learn, when students know how they're going, they do better. This is why things like self-assessment are so important to help students over time develop the ability to be able to accurately identify their strengths and areas to work upon, and to know with certainty how they're going. So let's just take a little detour back into 2020, and then we'll move into some of the research. COVID, when it struck, was both obviously a public health crisis, but it was also a humanitarian crisis and an economic crisis, and it's placed education smack bang in the centre of all of those. And we know across the globe, over 1.6 billion students were impacted by school closures, the physical closure of schools, and then the pushing out into fully remote experiences, which varied greatly across the globe, from schools delivering paper packs of curriculum being printed off at drop-off areas, through to schools using radio, public TV stations for the delivery of learning, obviously online, and the challenges that then presented around access to device and access to the internet. So a whole range of responses, which continues today in terms of the incredible range of strategies and multi-pronged approaches. In Australia, where I'm coming to you from, school is back and has been back for a long time. In Western Australia, I think there was a 2 or 3 week closure. The rest of the country, schools are back. Everything with its low COVID rate is relatively normal. That's not the case where I come from across the US, where most are remote learning at the moment fully. And then there are a number of schools which are operating on staggered days and a range of other models, or focusing on identified students of frontline workers face-to-face, or students with specific learning needs being prioritised for face-to-face instruction. So we know, and I mentioned that before, that educators have certainly been affected, a sense of professional loss that they've described, a concern about equity and burnout as being sort of the number 1, 2 and 3 reasons that they're feeling uncertain, anxious, frustrated. And obviously education systems, I mentioned broadly, have been affected, with schools in the early stages scrambling to provide functions of providing school meals to ensure safety of their students, and also to ensure that students were engaged and connected. One of the thoughts that's framed in the paper Education Reimagined by authors Joanne Quinn and Michael Fulham is this: that for decades, many education reform topics had been stalled anyway, and that we don't want to return to new normal because the old normal wasn't necessarily delivering the kind of education experience for students anyway. And what the events of 2020 have done is provide this accelerator, this release, if you like, as you can see on the slide, of this energy that's built up for innovation, this opportunity potentially for education to be reimagined around those things that people have known for years, but they've been stuck, they've been prevented. People knowing that profoundly personalized learning matters, knowing that experiential learning matters, knowing that the greater and more accurate and granular the feedback, the more likely students will succeed matters, and that technology can play a critical role in taking to scale and listening at scale in ways that we just can't do without the technology. So this acceleration, especially using digital, has certainly been a standout feature. The schools and the systems that did well across 2020 already had in place certain things. The ones I've been interviewing superintendents for a podcast series, and some of them have said quite openly and honestly, we were caught unprepared in 2020 and it was a mad scramble. There are others, however, who navigated 2020 quite successfully. And when you listen to them, they had certain things in place. They had a strong focus on personalised learning. They had a strong professional learning program in place that was teacher-led. It was really personalised professional learning for teachers by teachers. They had a strong technology infrastructure already. Many of them were already focused on remote delivery of learning and had spent quite a bit of time on instructional design of online learning experiences to make sure that they were also experiential and learner focused and had feedback loops and were collaborative and so on. The districts and the systems that had these in place already found themselves still in a position of pressure and tension to push out and scale, but they were much better prepared to provide a continuity of learning than those that did not have those factors in place. So some interesting learnings coming out, and I think one of the things that we all need to be doing across in our own countries and our own districts is to look at the root cause of success. Who were the students that were successful? Who were the teachers that were successful? Which were the schools and the districts that were successful? And what can we learn from them? The solutions for the future are already there. They're just not at scale at the moment. So as I mentioned before, the paper Education Reimagined positions sort of three phases that schools and systems are moving in between depending upon what is happening in their context. That very first phase, which focuses largely on just a response to the disruption. So quickly getting up communication systems, organising food safety, welfare checks, making sure that teachers and students and families are connected and know what is going on and the direction the school is taking. Most of us are still largely in this transitional phase. We're delivering either fully remote learning or hybrid learning models. Some of us have already returned back to face-to-face school, but even for them, for example, in Australia, there's a challenge there for them to reimagine what they're doing also, because one thing that we all need to be doing is not just planning for the just in time, but planning now for just in case, because it may not be COVID, but it will be something else that is going to disrupt the supply chain of education again. So we need to be planning for just in case to ensure that we're not caught like in 2020 and then having to quickly catch up and get up to speed. So most of us are in that transitioning, and the opportunity there is to be reimagining, to shift this to a learning forwards mindset, not a back to normal mindset. Now in the paper, we pick up, again, a lot of our solutions, if you like, for the future sit within the past. It's those education reform topics that had largely been stalled can now be accelerated and moved forwards. And one of those authors, Fullan and Quinn, would argue is critical is this shift towards deep learning, which can be accelerated by the use of technology thanks largely to the fact that so much data can be collected around how students are engaging, collaborating, how they're achieving. So you can see on this chart there's some examples around this shift from traditional to deep learning. And if you like, this is part of the blueprint that is provided in Education Reimagined for how we can manage to shift the education paradigm and move it to a learning forward mindset. So I'm often asked about, okay, well, what is the future of learning? What does it look like? And these are some of the things that have certainly come through over the years. And again, 2020 has acted as an accelerator for this. You know, learning has to be socially embedded. Learning is a social, emotional activity. It is something best done with other people. So when we design learning, we must design it so that it develops social and emotional skills, it levers social and emotional skills, it focuses on deep collaboration. Learning needs to be open-walled. Think back to my slides at the start with me, boat in the ocean, which means that, our schools and our thinking and our ideas operate on an outside-in model. So we're constantly bringing ideas from outside inside, and similarly taking our ideas outside and connecting to others. The future of learning is learning that is profoundly personalized. It's one of the areas technology can help support in providing sort of the universal design of learning, a range of ways of showing what you know and understand, whether it be digital ink or whether it's using keyboard or using diagrams, using mind maps, using text, using voice, using video, using audio, all those things. Needs to be contextualized, so it needs to match and be relevant to the learner and their community. And importantly, it must be inclusive and prioritize student agency. One of the things we know from neuroscience is that the human brain doesn't mind stress. Stress triggers a behavioral response, which is largely driven by our emotional selves. Comes back to emotions matter. So emotions are a response to a stress. Our body's designed for it. It's not good for us in the long term. What our brains don't like is they don't like uncertainty. They don't like being out of control. So when you think about that and the events of 2020 and you think of young people, they were in an environment which was largely out of their control. They had least choice, voice and agency, if you like. So it's important for us that as we design learning that provides learners with opportunity to take control. In our research, the class of 2030 and Life Ready Learning, the students were clear. They said that they didn't want their learning to be automated, but they did want to have autonomy. They also said that they valued their teacher and the role of the teacher was highlighted and amplified across all of the survey results. So the findings from the research papers around as we reopen, close, reopen, move back, all of those things, was that being mindful of well-being is critical. If we're going to get goodness from the experience of 2020 and 2021 as we move forwards, we need to be mindful of well-being. We need to reflect on the lessons learned. Safety and operations need to be managed. And importantly, we need to focus on quality learning. And one of the bits that came through so clearly from Education Reimagined came through the class of 2030 research and the research Emotion, Cognition in the Age of AI was that educators see well-being as critical. They always have done, but they've all noted a huge increase in this as a priority over the last number of years. And things to keep in mind for well-being as we navigate Education Reimagined is that everybody is affected by the events in unknown ways. So it's important for us to be cognizant of that our experiences or our students' experiences vary within the classroom, not just within the school or within the district or region or state. Assume people are not their best selves at times right now. So empathy, understanding, tolerance and patience are critical virtues. And the situation number 5 is going to continue to be dynamic. We are leading learning at a time where there is great ambiguity, uncertainty and complexity. That is the new normal at the moment. So in the interest of time, I'm going to sort of wrap up here with a couple of resources to share with you. The first one is just opportunities to learn with Microsoft about the role of social and emotional skills and practical strategies to support classroom teachers. You can see on this page, there's a link to a community that I founded, the Cell in Edu community, which is down in the bottom right-hand corner. There's about 9,000 educators in there sharing ideas. We published resource ideas borrowed from teachers like yourself, aka.ms/cells top 10. We work with partners like WeSchools and Headspace to create short courseware available in the Microsoft Education Center. Plus also we partner with foundations like Goldie Hawn's MindUp, and we offer on-demand webinars focused around mindful practice in education. Most of our social and emotional learning resources can be found on this webpage, and you can grab this afterwards, or I'll pop it in the text chat box. Plus also the research. It's important that what we do, what we say, what we think is grounded in research and evidence. So things like the Class of 2030, Life Ready Learning, and Emotion Cognition in the Age of AI will also be of great use to you. You can find out more great tips and tricks for using digital tools to help support learners flourish in the Microsoft Education Centre, or also visit the Microsoft Education webpage. So thank you again, DigiLearn, for the opportunity for this brief introduction to Microsoft Education, what we're thinking about in terms of education reimagined, and the critical role of social and emotional skills to support learner wellbeing. I'm Mark Sparvel. Look forward to catching up with you on Twitter. Bye.